All right, good morning.
Good morning.
Sunday morning edition of the Daf Yomi. We are on Daf Kuf Amud Beis, and we were amidst 5 different potential explanations for how to understand why it is that Reb Shimon could simultaneously be holding that you do eat a korban pesach if you're an onain, and if you don't eat a korban pesach if you're an onain. And we had some answers that he didn't mean that you don't eat the korban pesach. Well, he didn't mean, he meant that it was the korban chagiga. One opinion was that it was just tossed in there extra. He never intended to say that at all. Then we had other explanations that it depends on the circumstances. Could be if the day that the person dies is not the same as the burial, then the halachos of aninos are different for the night after. If the day the person dies, then potentially there's aninos at night. But if there's not, he wouldn't be an onain at night if it was just the day of the kavura. Then we had suggested, well, it depends if he's an onain before the obligation of the korban pesach comes upon him or not. And we had 2 different variants of that. We had Abaye's variant that said that if the person died before chatzos, well, then he's an onain first and therefore not obligated to the korban pesach. And if the person dies after chatzos, then he was chayav in korban pesach first. Rava goes one step further, and we'll just read it through quickly. Rava Amar Idi achar chatzos. He says both circumstances is where the person passed away after chatzos. Velo kasha. It's not a contradiction between the 2 opinions of Rabbi Shimon. Kan kodim sheshachtu v'zarku alav, kan le'achar sheshachtu v'zarku alav. It depends. When does he eat the korban pesach? He eats the korban pesach if the person died after they already brought the korban pesach for him. He already slaughtered it and already sprinkled the blood. Well, now he's got a korban pesach in his name. Comes tonight, he can eat it. But if he was an onain first, even though it was after chatzos, but they hadn't brought his korban pesach yet, then don't bring one for him, and then he doesn't eat it that night. Amar le Rav Ada bar Matana le Rava. So Rav Ada bar Masna is either Rav Masna or Matana, depending on which vowelizations you get. I think the art scroll says Masna, and the Mesifta says Matana. So I don't know. So he says to Rava, Achar sheshachtu v'zarku es damu ma dehava hava. What difference does it make whether you're saying, well, he can bring the korban pesach after they've already thrown the blood? They've already done the korban pesach. There's no point in Rabbi Shimon saying, once they've already done the korban pesach, he's allowed to bring korban pesach. I mean, it's done already. So Amar le Ravina, so Ravina answers back, Achilas psachim me'akva, that the consumption of the korban pesach is critical as an important element of the korban pesach. Therefore, it could be, the critical point is, once he's brought the korban pesach, can he eat it or not? Right? And if he couldn't eat it, that's why it says, once he's brought the korban pesach, then he's allowed to eat it. Because if he doesn't eat it, he's not yotzei the korban pesach. And we know that, the Rabbi bar Rav Huna, what Rabbi bar Rav Huna says, although we haven't seen what Rabbi bar Rav Huna says, because we stopped last night before saying it. And Amar le Rava says to Rav Ada, Tzayis mai de Amar le Rabach. You got to pay attention to what Ravina answered on that point. Now, this argument that the Rava and Rav Ada are talking about, between what Ravina is talking about and this korban pesach, we haven't seen. We ended there. And so now we're going to pick that up. What is this discussion about korban pesach and the requirement to eat it that we're referencing? So, by de Rabba bar Rav Huna, what is this statement that Rabba bar Rav Huna said that we derive from the statement that eating the korban pesach is what we call ma'akev? It is critical to the fulfillment of the requirement of eating korban pesach. Don't eat it, you did not fulfill your requirement of bringing korban pesach. Titania, we learn in Brisa. Yom Shemua, if there was a day that a person heard that a relative passed away, right? So the funeral already took place. The person wasn't aware, right? Back then, they didn't always know the day that somebody died, whether the person died. So if a relative was far away and he finds out that a person dies, so what's the halacha there? So that is kiyom kivura lemitzvas shiva ushloshim. That's considered like the day of the burial as far as counting shiva and shloshim. So that person, right? Not all the relatives have to line up as far as Shiva and Shloshim go. Some of the relatives might have started their Shiva 2-3 days ago. Then word gets to him a couple days later, he starts Shiva when he finds out. He doesn't join on day 3.
This is the pre-telephone.
That's correct, right?
If someone starts doing Shiva later, after their relative, could that be a problem on its own?
It's not a problem, right? Just count 7 days, right, from when you find out, right? So that is that's how that goes. Achilas and ule. Achilas psachim, and as far as eating the korban pesach goes, kiyom likud atzamos. It has the halacha of what's called likud atzamos, gathering up of the bones. If a person needs to be reinterred, right? If they have their grave that has to be moved, so when they remove the body from its one location and gets placed into its new location, so that day there's mourning, right? It's a day of, it's considered a day of mourning as well. But of the rules of mourning, it's kind of like a Shiva day, but it doesn't, not all the way. As far as the rules of Aninus, it's not like...
The one day of mourning, you have to rip something, the garment?
I don't remember, because the halachos of this are in Moed Katan, in the third parak of Moed Katan, I believe. So when we get around to there, we will remind ourselves all of those rules and things. It's so unusual, right? We don't really have this sort of circumstance nowadays. But I believe the answer is yes, you do tear crib, but I do not recall. So now, but however, the point of this is that the day that you gather the bones together, right, he's allowed, is like the day that he finds out, in that the halacha is he's allowed to eat the korban Pesach. Echad zeh ve'echad zeh, tova ve'ochel bekodshim la'erev. And it doesn't matter whether you're talking about the Yom Kivura, the day of the burial, or the day that the bones are being gathered, you can go to the mikvah and eat kodshim that night. Okay, so now, the Gemara wants to know, Hagufa Kasha. This sounds contradictory, because Amrat, the first part said, Yom Shmua ki Yom Kivura lemitzvah shiva u'shloshim. First you said that the day you find out about the person who died, that is like the day that the person is actually buried, as far as counting Shiva and counting Shloshim. Ula achilas psachim. And then, importantly for our discussion, that also as far as eating korban psachim, right? Kiyom likud, so he said that is kiyom likud atzamos, right? We are making a distinction that the Yom Shmua is like the day that you gather bones, which means it's not like the day of the actual burial, right? The day of the actual burial. So what would be the distinction as far as Korban Pesach? Obviously, the distinction is going to be when you can eat it, when you can't eat it. So the day that you gather bones, you can eat the Korban Pesach. The day that you actually bury the person in the first place, you don't eat the Korban Pesach. Mikal diyom kivura filor erev nami lo achil. That means what we're suggesting from here, that the day of burial, you don't eat it. That's what you're deriving from this. Then it says, V'hodar tani, then the end of this brisa says, Echad zeh ve'echad zeh, it doesn't matter whether you're talking about the day of gathering the bones or the day of the burial, Tovav oche bekodshim la'erev, he goes to the mikvah and he eats kodshim that night. So that means on the Yom Kippur he does eat kodshim. So first you say he doesn't, then you say he does. How do you understand this brisa? So Amar Rav Chisda says, Tanaihi, it is a machlokes tanoim. You just don't see in the beginning of the Mishnah goes according to one opinion, and the end of Brisa, the beginning goes according to one Tana, the end goes according to another Tana. It's just not clear from the Brisa that that's the case, but it must be, right? Because they contradict each other. So the one who holds, right, the one who holds at the beginning that the one who holds that the Aninus is D'Rabbanan, right? He teaches the beginning and says that Aninus is also afterwards. And the Tana that says he can go to the mikvah says you're allowed to eat the Korban Pesach. So now, this is where Rabbi Bar Rav Huna comes in. Rabbi Bar Rav Huna Amar Lo Kasha. Rabbi Bar Rav Huna says no, it doesn't have to be a contradiction. Kan Sheshama Shmua al Meso Samach Lishkia Sachama. The difference is, when did he hear the news about the funeral? If he heard the news for sure it's after it happened, but he hears it right before sunset, right? So now v'chein sheliktu lo atzamos samach lishkia sachama. So too, that's the same sort of situation. He's gathering the bones right before he's reburying right before sunset. V'chein shemes lo meis ukvaro samach lishkia sachama. And we're also talking about where the person dies on the 13th and they bury him right before the 14th, right before sunset. So now, what's going on is here like this. The day that you're gathering and the day that you hear, so they get finished up as soon as sunset happens, right? And also the Yom Kivura also becomes finished at the day right at sunset happens. So therefore, right, since on all of those days, the aninus doesn't continue into the night, because we said the day if the funeral is on the if the person actually died on the 13th and the burial is on the 14th, the aninus doesn't continue into the night. And also the day that you gather up bones, it doesn't continue into the night. And the day that you hear about it, the aninus doesn't continue into the night. So therefore, you can eat the Korban Pesach that night. But the beginning, right, the beginning of the brisa, where it says you can't, that is le'achar shkia sechama, where you find out after shkia. So now you hear about this after shkia. So now, or the person died, right? So what happens is now, because of that, or the time of the kvura was after shkia. When is the aninus then? He becomes an onein into the night because they haven't buried the person yet. Mm-hmm. So therefore, once the night falls, they said he can't eat kodshim, even the Korban Pesach, after shkia, because he's already into the next day already by the time he's burying or hears about it. One second, am I right? Pesach, for Atzmo. Now, right, so that's where our distinction is going to be. The Yom HaKvura, so if the day of the burial, the Rabbanan said, since it's taking place after Shkia, so now, remember that the day the person dies is really where the Aninus Deorais is. But since he's getting buried the next day, we carry over to the next day. That's where the Aninus Rabbanan is. That night, if the burial doesn't take place till that night, then the Aninus is still going to continue on into that night, and it's also Rabbanan. However, in a circumstance where they gather the bones after Shkia, right, the Rabbanan said, well, all of this is really a Rabbanan level of Aninus anyway. They're gathering bones. It's not the day the person dies, not even the burial. It's an extra lesser level, or the day you hear about it. So therefore, in that circumstance, after nightfall, you're not allowed to eat any kodshim, but you can eat the Korban Pesach. So they're lenient in the circumstance where you gather the bones or you hear about it. So that's what the brisa says. When the brisa says, right, the day, what does it say? It says the Yom Shmu is like the Yom Kevura, right, as far as Shiva and Shloshim, and Achilas Psachim, that you're not allowed to eat Korban Pesach because that is already into the night. However, right, when you're gathering the bones, so then you can eat the korban. You can eat kodshim la'erev at night, and the Yom HaShmua as well. So now the Gemara asks on Rabbi Bar Rav Huna's statement, "Liachar shkia sachama mai dehavahava." 1 second. Okay, so you're telling me that after nightfall he's allowed to eat his korban pesach now, according to the rules that you just established. We're dealing with a situation where they gathered the bones after Shkia, or he hears about the Shmua after Shkia, and we're saying he's allowed to eat the Korban Pesach. Why? Because he already brought a Korban Pesach that day. During the day, he didn't know anything about this, right? He was completely fine, so he brought his Korban Pesach, everything was going fine. Then somehow after Shkia, somebody tells him about a relative that died. So, I mean, he's already done the Korban Pesach. What's the point? El Shmami no, you can see clearly from what Rabbi Rav Huna is saying is, Achilas Pesachim Ma'akva. The whole question is, can he eat the Korban Pesach? Because after he's already brought it, maybe now he's an onein, he can't eat the Korban Pesach because he's now an onein, midrabanan, and couldn't eat it. So therefore they say, no, he can eat it. Which is why should that be? The answer is, because that's ma'akev, that's critical to the Korban Pesach service. You've already brought a Korban Pesach, and we're going to be lenient on you in these circumstances of being an onein, and allow you to eat the Korban Pesach. So therefore you see that's how Rava says, I'm holding like this statement, that the question of once you've already brought the Korban Pesach is still relevant because the question is, can you eat it or not? And Rabbi Bar Rav Huna says that you can eat it because it's critical, because that's what's important. But not other kodshim. That is not the case, right? That by the other kodshim, where the consumption is not critical, they don't eat it. right? That's only achilas psachim, only the korban pesach they're allowed to eat, and that's why it makes a difference. Now, Rav Ashi gives a different answer. Rav Ashi says, "My echad zeh ve'echad zeh." How do you explain this brisa? What does it mean? This, the Yom HaKvura and the day that you gather up bones. Hachikamer, this is what it means. Echad Yom Shmua ve'echad Yom Likut. They're not talking about the day of the burial and the day of the and the day of the the day of the Shmua. We're saying the day that you hear and the day that you gather the bones. Tova ve'ochel b'kachim la'erev. That is where you're allowed to eat. You're allowed to go to the mikvah and eat kachim that night. But the Yom Kivura, the day that you actually bury the person, even though the person died the day before, is still prohibited to eat kachim that night. So he makes a distinction. He says that in some ways, right?
Even if you miss the funeral, and the funeral the day before, you still have that same.
So that, well, not if you missed the funeral, right? The funeral didn't take place, right? The person died the day before, and then the next day the funeral happens, they bury the person. That day, you cannot eat korbanos at night. That's how he's making the distinction. However, v'had Rav Ashi bedusahi, but Rav Ashi's explanation is not correct, because michti Allah koi, because take a look at what the Mishnah, what the Brisa says. The Brisa says, echad zeh ve'echad zeh. Right, this language of the brisa, it should say that the same circumstance is this circumstance and this circumstance, which means we're talking about two different circumstances. That the beginning seems to be where the beginning compares the day of Shmuah to the Yom Likut. Right, the day of hearing is the same as the day of gathering of the bones. That's how the beginning starts. Whereas the distinctive case is the Yom Kivura. Now, the way we were explaining it was, we said, but now, echad zeh ve'echad zeh, both of these distinct cases, i.e. the Yom Kivura and the Yom of Shmuah, are the same in this regard. But according to Rav Ashi, he says, no, we keep those distinctions. Well, if that's the case, it shouldn't say echad zeh ve'echad zeh. Both this side, which we distinguished from the previous side in the first part, it should say zeh v'zeh miboileh. It should say, and both of these cases, which we said were similar before, they both have the same law. Yom Shmuah and Yom Likut also have the same laws like this. El Shmami no. So therefore you see that from the language echad zeh ve'echad zeh is a language of where you're comparing things that you previously contrasted. So therefore Bedusa, he's making a mistake. That's not the proper explanation of the brisa. Okay, so now let's go back to the issue that Rav Chisda brought up. What do we have Rav Chisda before? Rav Chisda gave one of the answers? I think Rav Chisda was. Yeah, he says, where do we find a machlokas tanoim? The question is, where do we find a machlokas tanoim, whether aninus is, whether there's an onein midrabanon after the day of kivura? Right. That was the argument. Rav Chisda said that there's a doraisa, there's a dorabanan. That's where the argument is: can you eat the korban pesach? Can you not? So the question is, umay tanai. Where is this argument that argue on this point? The day of kivura happens, the burial happens, and according to Rav Chisda, there's an opinion that says that night you're still in onein midrabanan. So the answer is Ditanya. We learn in a brisa. Ad masai mis onein alav. Where is how long is this is the prohibition of, or how long is the status of being an onein last, and you can't eat kachim? Kol hayom. Right. That's what the whole day. Rabbi disagrees. He says kol zman shelo nikbar. It continues as long as the person is not buried. Okay. So therefore now, but my askinon, what's going on over here? If we're talking about the day the person dies, right? Okay, so now that would mean that the first person says that you're an onein all day. Rebbe says you're only an onein up until the burial. After the burial, you're no longer an onein. There isn't anybody who disagrees that the day the person dies, where that whole day is being an onein from the Torah's perspective, and everybody must agree that that night there's some level of being an onein that night. So therefore, how could Rebbe say up until the point? Rebbe wouldn't be able to say that the being an onein ends as soon as the burial takes place. V'tu, and furthermore, Rebbe then says, well, that's asking on the first opinion. Sorry, the first opinion says that he's only an onein for the day. Well, That's not true. Everybody agrees there's some kind of being an onain at night. Rabbi says, Kozman shol nikbar, as long as he's not buried, ha kivaro ishtari le. That means what? As soon as he's buried in the middle of the day, now he's permitted, he's not an onain anymore, he can go eat kachem. Umika deles le v'acharisa kiyomar. Who doesn't hold of the pasuk in Amos that says that it's that in the end it will be like a bitter day, meaning that from that pasuk we learn that the day of death is considered a bitter day. The entire day is considered to be an onain. Everyone agrees, at least at that point. So there's no opinion. So we have this statement that says, Aninos lasts for a day. And Rebbe says up until the burial. Well, we have two problems with that. Number one, lasts for a day. Everybody agrees there's got to be some kind of being an onain at night. And as far as that day being stopping in the middle, that wouldn't make sense either. So therefore, that's not the proper explanation of this state of these Tanaim.
Where do we hold today? Like, is someone an onain post burial, like into the evening, or at which time they can resume?
So the big question is putting on tefillin, right? Mm-hmm. Whether you're an onain for that day and you're an onain, you don't put on tefillin, for example, make brachos. So do you then, when you're finished, when you come home from the funeral, do you put on tefillin? And I believe practically we don't, although I Baruch Hashem, not in the situation, and I am rarely involved for being a Kohen, I'm rarely involved in the funeral parts and things, and I always come to the Shiva later on.
Right.
So I believe you don't put on tefillin later on in the day. I think that you keep your status.
Wait till the next day or whatever.
Right, you wait till the next day. I believe that your status of being an onain now at night, it wouldn't make a difference because being an onain that night, in practice, you're not putting on tefillin or any of those. But as far as other brachos and things are concerned, I'll find the halachas of mourning, and maybe we'll post that on the chat so you'll be able to make sure we have the answer to that.
Great.
Amar Rav Sheshes is a Yom Kivurakai. This is talking about not the day the person dies, the day of the burial, right? So if the day the person dies is not the same as the day of burial, and that might make the practical difference also for nowadays as well, right? So what happens is, right, that what happens is, according to the first opinion, so you're an onain for the entire day, and there's no aninos the following night of the Yom Kivura, and the Tanakama says, Rebbe holds that already once the burial takes place on that next day, that's the end of being an onain. Okay, so that's how Rav Sheshes learns it. So, Maskif Rav Yosef asks the following question on Rav Sheshes' opinion. He says, Haktani, but we learned in the Mishnah in Maseches Pesachim, Hashomea al Meso, right? If somebody hears about a death later on, Kemalaki Datsamos, he has the same law as somebody gathering the bones. Tova v'ocha b'kachim la'erev, he can go to the mikvah and eat kachim at night. Miklau, so that implies the Yom Kivura, on the day of the burial, thank you, afilu la'erev nami lo achim. That means that the day of the burial, he would not eat, because it's only because it's the Yom Shmua, the day that he hears, or the day that they gather the bones, that he's able to go to the mikvah and eat that night. But on the day of the Kivura, which Rav Sheshes just said, that both opinions hold that the Aninos ends at the end of the day, and even Rebbe says ends earlier on in the day during the Kivura. So whose opinion would that be? Right? That doesn't make sense. We just said that you would not be able to, the Yom Kivura, you'd be prohibited at night. Ela Toritz, rather you have to explain the brisa, not like Rav Sheshes. You have to explain it like this. Ad Masai misonin in a love. How long are the krovim, are the relatives in the status of being an onain? Kol oso hayom, the entire day that the person's buried. So therefore, it's not necessarily just the Yom Misa, but even the day of the burial. And the leilo, and also the night afterwards. Okay, that's what the first opinion. When the first opinion says kol hayom, it means the entire day plus the night afterwards. Rebbe says, kol zman shelo nikbar, right? It's as long as the person's not buried. Aval nikbar below leilo. But if he's buried, so then it's just that day. If he got buried during the day, so then it would end and there's no aninos at night. So that's the argument, whether there's being an onain the night following or not. According to the Tanakama, the day of the burial, right? For sure the day that the person dies, for sure there's an onain that night. The day of the burial, midrabanan, he's an onain at night. Rebbe says the day of the burial, he's only up until that day. That night he's not an onain. Okay, so that's how he reads it. Amrua Kamei de Rabbi Yirmiyah. So they said this answer in front of Rabbi Yirmiyah, and so Amar, he says, Gava Rabba Rav Yosef Lema Hachi. How could a great person like Rav Yosef give that explanation? That makes no sense. Lema de Rebbe Lakula. He's basically making Rebbe the lenient opinion, after all, right? Because the Tanakama says the day plus the following night he's an onain. And according to Rebbe, he's not even an onain that night. That means Rebbe's the lenient opinion. Ve'atanya, but we have another brisa. Ad masai mis onain alav. How long are you an onain for? Calls man she'eno nikbar, as long as the person has not been buried, the person remains in the status of being an onain. Afilu mikan v'asar yamim, even if that takes place for 10 days. Chas v'shalom, there's a circumstance that somebody is not able to get buried, so then that person, the relatives, remain an onain for even 10 days. Divrei Rebbe. That's what Rebbe says. So Rebbe's being strict. When Rebbe says until the person's buried, he doesn't mean to exclude the night following. He means to say that your aninus lasts as long as the person's not buried, not just the next day. The Chachamim say, Ein misonin alav ela oso hayom bilvad, right? It's only that day, the day of the kavur, the day of the burial, that he's an onain, and not the night afterwards. So therefore, from this, right, from the language, Ein misonin alav, they're the lenient opinion. Right? They say, he's not an onain like you say, Rebbe. Rebbe says, no, he's an onain for as long as he's not buried. The Chachamim says, no, only that day. So that means that Rebbe is the lenient opinion and Rebbe's the strict opinion. So therefore, if Rebbe's the lenient opinion, so how do you explain this? You have to explain it like this. Ad masahu misonain alav, how long are you an onain for? Kol oso hayom, the entire time of the day of Kavura, again, not the day of Misa, the day of Kavura, the day that he's buried, below Leilo, not at night. That's what the Chacham's opinion is. They are lenient, right? That just that day. Rebbe says, Kol zman shelo nikbar, as long as he's not buried. The nikbar tofes Leilo. But if he was buried, he's still stricter and says even the night. So therefore, the way that he interprets this argument about whether there's being an onain at night following is in this, according to Rebbe, there is being an onain the night following, and according to the Chachamim, there is not. Okay, so that's the argument between the Tanoim, where we had listed above whether there's a prohibition of eating kodshim and korban pesach at night, midrabanan, after the Yom Kivura, or not. That's what Rav Chisda was referencing. Okay, now, Amrua Kame de Rava. Now, they said this explanation, Rabbi Yirmiyah's explanation, in front of Rava now. Okay? Midik Amar Rebbe, Yom Kivura Tofes Leilo Midrabanan. The fact that Rebbe is holding that the day of Kivura, the day of the burial, being an onain follows into the night, only rabbinically, Miklau de Yom Misa Tofes Leilo Midoraisa. That seems to imply that Rebbe is holding the day that the person dies. Not only is the person an onain during the day midoraisa, from a Torah perspective, that night he's an onain midoraisa as well. Okay, now the Sava Rebbe. Now the question is that true? Does Rebbe hold that way? Sava Rebbe aninos laila deoraisa. Does Rebbe hold that there's ever a nighttime being an onain that is from the Torah? Vehatanya. We learned in a brisa that the Torah says, by the story of Aaron and his sons. So remember, the story goes that the Shiva Yemei Miluim are going on. Moshe Rabbeinu acts as the Kohen for 7 days, and he's putting up the Mishkan, taking down the Mishkan every day, he's offering korbanos. Day number 8, big celebration. Now Aaron and his 4 sons are going to take over as being Kohanim. Nadav and Avihu, his 2 oldest sons, act independently, or they do some sort of avera, as Rashi describes. Right, for example, or they drank wine, or they acted without asking their Rebbe, one of the different various explanations, and they get killed on that day. They die. So now, Aaron HaKohen is an onain on that day. Okay, so here's day number 8 of Yemei Miluim, and there are korbanos that have to be brought. Specifically, we're going to talk about 3 different korban chatoses that have to be brought. One, because it's the 8th day of the Yemei Miluim. One is being brought by Nachshon ben Aminadav. Nachshon ben Aminadav is the first of the Nesiim, and he starts on Rosh Chodesh Nisan to bring the korbanos of the Nesiim. So he brings day 1, Rosh Chodesh, the 8th day of the Yemei Miluim, he's bringing his korban. That's a korban chatos as well. And we know the rule by the Korban Chatos is that it's brought and the Kohanim are supposed to eat it. Then it's also the first day of Nisan, which means it's Rosh Chodesh. Now, we don't have to worry about the Korban Olos that are being brought. The Korban Olos are all being burnt anyway. The Korban Chatos, though, is the big issue, because can Aaron eat it or does he not eat it? Okay, so that's our issue. So here's what happens. Okay, Moshe Rabbeinu shows up and he sees that one of the Korban Chatos offerings has been burnt rather than been eaten by Aaron. Right? It seems like the other two have been eaten. And Moshe Rabbeinu is confused and frustrated, and he acts angrily towards Aaron and says, why is it that you burnt this Korban? There's still time, right? Why is it that you didn't listen? Why is it that I told you that you're supposed to bring this Korban despite the fact that you're an onain? Why didn't you consume it? Okay? And it's specifically the Korban of Rosh Chodesh that is the one that they burned. So this is what he says. So Moshe discovers that Aaron has not consumed, he has not eaten the Korban of Rosh Chodesh, and he's burned it. So Moshe says to them, Hein Hayom, wasn't it, does Aaron say that? Right? I ate the chatos of today. That is what Aaron replies. So if I would have eaten it today, this is what Aaron says to Moshe, if I would have eaten it today, would that have been good in Hashem's eyes? So this all takes place in Vayikra Perek Yud. So that's what he says. So therefore, he's arguing back to Moshe. He says, Hashem doesn't want me to eat this korban. Moshe says, Hashem wants to eat the korban. He says, that's not true. I don't. Hashem doesn't. The story continues on, and once Aaron explains whatever it is that he explains, not clear from the psukim what he explains, Moshe says, you're right. That's a good point. And he agrees with Aaron, and he's happy about it, and he, as we'll see. So, Ani hayom aser laila mutter. Now, we learn from that, what's Aaron saying? I'm an onaim. I'm prohibited today. Therefore, I couldn't eat the korban today. But the fact that he says today I'm an onaim means that tonight he's not. So, uladoros bein bayom ubein balayla aser. Right? So, however, right, that's so therefore he says that I can eat these, I can't eat the korbanos today. I can do these other korbanos. So I didn't burn them because I'm an onaim today. I won't eat them today. But tonight I'll eat them. Right? But ledoros, the korban which is for all generations, which is the Rosh Chodesh. Remember, out of the three korbanos, one is special because they're setting up the Mishkan. One is special because Nachshon ben Aminadav is bringing. Those are korbanos that will never be brought again, ever. But Rosh Chodesh is brought every month. So Aaron says, the rule for all time is that you're an onain for the day and for the night. So therefore, Divrei Rabbi Yehuda, that's how Rabbi Yehuda learns. Now, that means, that's what Rabbi Yehuda says. Rabbi says, Aninos Laila ena midivrei Torah el midivrei Sofrim. That is not correct. There is no such thing as being an onain at night. It's only rabbinic. So I've got to explain what Aaron was saying in a different way. However, we're going to see what Aaron was talking about as we do the Agadat in a moment. However, the critical point is that Rebbe does not hold that there's Torah, that there's aninos from the Torah at night. So how are you explaining that Rebbe holds there's aninos from the Torah at night, the day of the person dies, but it's dirabanan the day after the burial? So the answer is liolam. So really, dirabanan it is only rabbinic, meaning that Rabbi Yehuda is actually saying the day the person dies, you're an onain d'oraisa. The night after, it's only dirabanan. The Yom Kivura, the day of the burial, right? That's also dirabanan. And nevertheless, there's also a dirabanan that night. V'chachamim osu chizuk l'divreihem yoser shel Torah. Even though the Yom HaMisa is d'oraisa, and aninos at night is not at all, there is no aninos at night, the Rabbanon establish aninos also after they establish. So basically what happens is, the Rabbanon said, we're going to make you an onain the day that you do the burial as well. And not only that, but we're going to be stricter on that day, that not only is that day prohibited, but the night following is as well. The Torah doesn't have that. The Torah doesn't have aninos afterwards. And sometimes the Chachamim will make their rules stricter than the actual Torah rules as well, in order to enforce the severity of what they are saying. So therefore, it doesn't sound shocking. Just because you would say that Rabbanan ke'ein d'oraisa tiknum, right? We usually say that the Rabbanan imitated the laws of the Torah. So if the Torah says that being an onen is for a day and not for night, then surely the rabbinic version of that should be for the day and not for the night. No, Rabbi says that being an onen is for the day, the night following is the Rabbanan. The next day, the day of the burial, being an onen d'Rabbanan, and the following night as well. Okay, so that's how Rabbi Yehuda. So therefore, that's where Rabbi holds that being an onen is rabbinic, and that's the opinion that holds that being an onen at night is rabbinic. Okay, so now let's learn this this discussion between Moshe Rabbeinu and Aaron for a moment, and understand what was their argument about. So Tana Rabbanan rabbis, when we learn in a brisa. So this we were told that we were the mincha that was brought on the 8th day of the Yemiluim. So the pasuk says, "Va'achaltem oso b'makom kodesh." You're supposed to eat it. Moshe tells Aaron, "You're supposed to eat it in a holy place." Kikein tuvesi, because that was commanded to me. Okay, that is by now. He's upset because Aaron does not consume the chatas of Rosh Chodesh. They burned it. So there it says, Achol tochlu oso b'kodesh, you're supposed to consume it in a holy place, kasher tzivesi, like I commanded, right? So therefore Moshe says to Aaron, right, you were supposed to eat it. And then it also says, by the chazeh and the shok of the shamei tzibor, they had shlamim of the tzibor, they were also, that was brought because it was that were also supposed to be brought. It says, Moshe tells Aaron and his children, Kasher tzivah Hashem, you're supposed to eat it like Hashem commanded. So now, Kichein tuvesi, why does he say Kichein tuvesi, right? So Hashem told Moshe, Aninos yochluha. You're supposed to eat this korban mincha despite the fact that you're an onen. Normally an onen doesn't eat any of the korbanos. You have to eat it, even though you're onenim. Then it says kasher tzivesi, right? So now Moshe says, at the time, at the moment when Nadav and Avihu dies, he says to them, kasher tzivesi, you have to eat it like I commanded you. Past tense, right? I already commanded. Amar lahen kasher tzivah. Then he says to them, you're supposed to eat all of the korbanos today while you're an onen, because that's what I had learned from Hashem. Because today is different from any other type of day, right? Today, you're allowed to eat kodshim as an onen because Hashem told us so. Now, when he comes and he sees that Aaron has burned this seir of Rosh Chodesh, he says, why didn't you eat it like kasher tzivisi, like I commanded, right? So, kasher tzivah Hashem, lo me'elai ani omer. Moshe says, it's like that Hashem commanded, not me, I didn't make this up. So Aaron, why are you not listening to what Hashem said? So okay, so that's the conversation that happens. Now, Uraminhi, here's the contradiction of this brisa. So mipnei aninos nisrafa, the chatas of Rosh Chodesh that Aaron didn't want to eat was burned because he was an onen. Lekach nemar, therefore Aaron said ka'ele, right? That he says that. These are the things that happened to me today. That was his, when he says, V'tikren al Ka'ela, he says to Moshe, he says, you know what happened to me today? He says, why didn't you eat it like I told you? He says, because you know what happened to me today. He says, I'm an onen. So therefore, then as soon as that happens, the brisa says, Vayitav be'inav. Moshe says, oh, that's a good point. So what's going on here? Because on the one hand, Moshe, according to one brisa, Moshe's upset. He says, I know you're an onen, but you were told to do it anyway. Then in the other brisa, it has Aaron saying, you know what happened to me today, and Moshe saying, oh, you're right. So Amar Shmuel, so Shmuel says, lo kasha. So here's what happened. The first brisa is Rabbi Yehuda, ha Rabbi Nechemiah. It's a brisa, the difference of opinion between Rabbi Yehuda, and the second brisa is Rabbi Nechemiah. Here's how it goes. Titania, we're in a brisa. Mipnei aninus sarfuha, right? The reason why it was burnt is because Aaron was an onen. Lekach namar ka'ela. Right, that's why it says ka'ela. Right, so he says I'm an onen. That's why I ate that's why I didn't eat the seir and I burned it. Divrei Rabbi Nechemiah. That's how Rabbi Nechemiah learns. Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon omrim. Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon say that's not why. Mipnei tuma nisrafa. That Moshe Rabbeinu says, why didn't you eat it? I told you that you have to eat it even though you're an onen. And Aaron says, no, that's not why. It's because there was some other type of tumah that happened to it. It became tameh. I burned it. It has nothing to do with being an onain. Because if what you're suggesting is because I'm an onain, it was burnt. So then why didn't Aaron burn all 3 korbanos? Right? He's an onain. He shouldn't eat anything. So therefore, it would make any difference. Davar acher. Another point is he would have been able to eat it that night. Right? So he didn't have to burn it. He could have eaten it that night. Davar acher, another point is, why do you have to burn it? Pinchas was a Kohen too. Pinchas wasn't an onain. It was his uncles who died. So he's not an onain. He could have eaten it. Okay. So now, so that's the one way of looking at these 2 brises. That one is Rabbi Nechemiah's point of view, one is Rabbi Yehuda's point of view. Okay, so Rava says no. Idi v'idi Rabbi Nechemiah. Both opinions are Rabbi Nechemiah's, and the issue is Aaron burned it because of being an onain. So lo kasha, kan bekodshei shah, kan she bekodshei doros. It made a difference. Aaron's point was, I burned, he tells Moshe, you know I'm an onain. I listened to you when it came to the korbanos that had to do with that day, that were specific to that day, because Hashem says the korbanos that had to do with that day, I'm allowed to eat. But Hashem wasn't telling me that means that I can derive from there that a korban, which regularly in the future a Kohen couldn't eat because he's an onain, I could eat because it's still a Rosh Chodesh offering. Rosh Chodesh offerings cannot be eaten while you're an onain. That's the distinction between the 2. So that's why he ate the other 2, but not this one. Okay. So now, Reb Nechemiah heichem et tartz lo nikroi. Now we got to know, how does Reb Nechemiah read these psukim? V'Rabbanan heichem et tartz lo nikroi. How do the Rabbanan read these psukim? Let's read through the psukim and understand how this conversation between Aaron went. Right, according to the Rabbanan who say they're arguing about Tumah, that's what Aaron told him, and according to Reb Nechemiah, who said it was about being an onain. Reb Nechemiah mitaritz lehu hachi. Reb Nechemiah learns it as follows: Madua lo achaltem. Right, the first question that Moshe asks is, why didn't you eat it? Right, why didn't you eat the korban chatos in the holy place? Amar lo Moshe la'Aaron. Moshe says to Aaron, Shema nichnas dama lifnei v'lifnim. Maybe the problem was it became tamei because the blood went into the heichal. Right, that would invalidate it. Amar lo, to which Aaron replies, Hein luhu v'az dama el kodesh pnima. Aaron says, no, their blood was not brought into the heichal. That did not happen. Right? So Moshe says to Aaron, Shema chutz l'mechitza yatas. Maybe it went out of the azara. That would invalidate it too. Amar lo, Aaron says to Moshe, Bekodesh haisa. No, it never left. That wasn't the problem either. V'dilba ma'aninos akriv tuha upsal tuha. Maybe you were an onain, and an onain can't do the service. Remember, an onain can eat it, but an onain, maybe you brought it when it was you were an onain. An onain can't do service. Amar lo, Aaron says to Moshe, Moshe v'chihem hikrivu ani krafti. He says, Moshe, my sons didn't bring it, I did, and I'm the Kohen Gadol. The Kohen Gadol's allowed to do the avodah while he's an onain, right? So now Moshe gets upset. That's what Moshe says to Aaron, right? So Amar lo, hein lo hu vaz dama, uba kodesh haisa. The blood was not brought. If now Moshe, here's what the pasuk says: the blood wasn't brought into the heichal, so it's not possible. The blood wasn't brought outside the azara, so it's not possible. So you got to eat it. Kasher tzivesi, like I was commanded, like I commanded you. Yeah, I got to eat it now. You're an onain, but you got to eat it. Ba'aninus yochlua. Amar lo, to which Aaron says to Moshe, he says, you know I'm an onain. If this, what happened to me is like this, if I would eat this chatos today, would that be good in the eyes of Hashem? Meaning, Aaron says to Moshe, Shema lo shamata ela b'kodshei shah. When Hashem told you can eat the korban, the korbanos can be eaten while you're an onain, wasn't he talking about just the korbanos that had to do with today, Nachshon's korban, the Yemei Miluim korban, but the ibekachik doros, if it was talking about the korban Rosh Chodesh, which is applicable for all generations, kal v'chomer mi meiser hakal. I could derive a kal v'chomer from meiser, from the tithe, the meiser sheni, which is more lenient. Ma meiser hakal omra Torah lo achalti ba'onimi menu. It says in the Torah that somebody who's an onain can't eat meiser sheni because doros, the korbanos for all generations, lo kol shkein, they can't be eaten by an onain. So therefore he says, Hashem told you that I can eat it when I'm an onain. Are you sure, Moshe, that Hashem was talking about all the korbanos? Or was he only talking about 2 out of the 3? So miyad, immediately, vayishma Moshe heard Aaron's argument, vayitav be'enav. And he said, that's a good point. I heard what Hashem said that you can eat the korbanos be'aninos, and I assumed it meant all the korbanos, but now that you're pointing that out, Hashem never told me that you can eat all of them. Hoda v'lo bosh Moshe lomar lo shamati. He says, Moshe was, he agreed. And he wasn't embarrassed. He didn't say, oh, Hashem never told me that. El amar shamati v'shachachti. He says, no, that's what Hashem told me, and I forgot. You're right, Aaron. You reminded me what Hashem said. That's correct. Okay, that's how Rabbi Nechemia learns Psukim. There was an argument about which of the korbanos an onain could eat. Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon. Now, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon say no. It wasn't an argument about being an onain at all. Heichi mitzartzu. How do they read the Psukim? Hachi mitzartzu. They read the Psukim like this: Madua lo achaltem es hachatos bimkom hakodesh. Why didn't you eat the korban in a holy place? Like I said, Shema nichnos dama lifnei. Maybe it went into the Heichal, like we said, Amar lo, Heilu huvas dama. It was not brought in. Shema chutz l'mechitza, maybe it got brought outside the Azara, Yatzos. Amar lo, he said, no, Hein b'kodesh haisa, it was in the Kodesh. V'dil b'baninas ikriv tuha upsal tuha, maybe it was brought while you were an anointing and you've invalidated it. Amar lo, Moshe, he says, Moshe, Hein ikrivuha, my sons didn't bring it, ha upasuba, and that de pasuba, that would invalidate it. Aninus, ani ikravtia, I'm the one who brought it. So therefore, it's okay. V'dilma agav muraraychu pashatu ba v'itamai. So maybe Moshe then accuses, this is the new part, now Moshe accuses Aaron, well, maybe because you weren't paying attention, because you were so bitter, right? You weren't paying attention, and it became tamei as a result. Amar lo, that's where Aaron pushes back. He says, Moshe, kachani beinecha, that's how you view me. I'm not careful. Shanim mevaze kodesh shemayim. I would not treat the kodesh shemayim. He says, look what happened to me today. And I'm here doing the service. You see that I'm not lying down on the job because my son's died. I'm still doing the service. Right? Even if, right, it would happen more, even if I would have more avelus, I'd still be able to focus and do my job. I would not treat the kodesh shemayim in any less of a way. Amar lo, v'ihein lohuvas damo b'kodesh haisa. If that's true, the blood wasn't brought in, and it wasn't brought outside, achotochlosa b'kodesh kasher tzivesi, then eat it like you're supposed to. So ba'aninos yochlu, you can eat it while you're an onain. Amar lo, shema lo shamata ela balayla. Maybe, well, you heard this halacha, you're supposed to eat the korban ba'aninos, that's at night. Right? Because then there's no being an onain at night. Diba yom, because if it was during the day, kavachomer mi meiser hakal. So then you'd have a kavachomer from Meiser, which says that it says Uma meiser hakal amar Torah lo achalti ba'onim imanu. If Meiser Sheni, we said you're not allowed to eat it when you're an onain. Kodesh hachamer lo kol shekain. So kodshim for sure. The Rosh Chodesh offering can't be eaten while you're an onain during the day, but at night you'd be able to eat it. So okay, so miyad vayishma Moshe vayitav beinav. Moshe heard that and he said, "That's a good point." Okay, don't eat it now. Wait till tonight. Lo bosh Moshe. Moshe was not embarrassed. Lomar lo shamati, to say I never heard that. Elo shamati v'shachachti. He admitted it. He said, "I did hear that, but I forgot." Iboilahu lishahuye l'michle be'orsa. So then the question is, why is he burning it? He should have waited until that night. So the answer is tuma ba'onas haisa. There was a separate tuma that had nothing to do with anything of the story. And that invalidated, they were waiting. They held it, they had there, and they were waiting. And then it just became tamei, so they burned it. But that was a separate issue. Okay. Bishlama, the Rabbanan find according to the rabbis, Hainu dichsiv, that's why it says in the pasuk, Hayom, right? Can I eat it today? Meaning, right, I'm only allowed to eat it at night. That was his point. That was Aaron's main point. I can't eat it today, but I can eat it tonight. According to Rabbi Nechemia, my Hayom, why is he telling him today? He could have eaten it today. Right? That wasn't the point, right? So the answer is chovas hayom. He's saying, I can only eat the offerings that are coming because of today, not the ones that are Rosh Chodesh offerings that come every Rosh Chodesh. Okay, Bishlama Rabbi Nechemia Hainu Dichsiv Hein Hayom. So I understand according to Rabbi Nechemia, he says Hein Hayom Hikrivu. The word Hayom is extra, right? So it should have said Hein Hikrivu. So why is it Hein Hayom? They are the ones. They are the korbanos of today. Right? That's how he's explaining the psukim. El Rabbanan, my hein hayom, but according to the Rabbanan, hein hayom, what it was that they are for today. Today is the problem. Just say hayom. Hachikam it means hein hikrivu, ani hikravi, kikrafti. He's saying they versus they today. They didn't bring it, I did. Right? I'm the one who brought it today, and therefore that's why they are valid. And even though I'm an onain today, I'm able to eat it tonight because I'm the Kohen Gadol. Okay. Amar Mar, what we had suggested before is Hayu l'shloshton sheyisarfu, that they should have burned all 3 korbanos. That was one of the questions. We've resolved that. But my shloshton, what are these 3 korbanos that we're talking about, incidentally? So, Detanya, we learn in Brisa, Vesir achatos dorosh Moshe. Right? The pasuk says, the seir achatos, dorosh Moshe. Seir, zu seir Nachshon. The seir, the Brisa explains, this goat is the seir, the goat that Nachshon ben Aminadav brought on that day. Right? The pasuk says in Bamidbar, chatos zu chatos shmini. This was the chatos offering that was brought on the 8th day of the Yemei Miluim. So that's the second korban. And from the word darash, right? There was the extra word darash, seir shel Rosh Chodesh. That was the goat that was brought on Rosh Chodesh. So therefore, you've got 3 korbanos. Yachol shloshton nisrafu. Maybe all 3 were burnt, not only one of them. Talmud Lomar, the pasuk says, v'hinei soraf. Behold, it was burned, singular. Echad nisraf lo shlosh nisrafu. Moshe noted only 1 was burnt, not all 3. Darosh darash. So it says darosh darash. That Moshe he learned the limud, right? So now shtei drishus lama. Why does it say twice? Amar lahu mipnei machatas zu nisrafa ve'elu munachos. He said, why is it that this was burnt and the other ones are fine, right? And they're sitting here waiting for tonight. So and I don't know which of these ones are the ones that are being burned and which ones that he's eating. The pasuk says that it was brought to bear the sin of the congregation. Havi Omer Zesir Shel Rosh Chodesh. That's the Rosh Chodesh, because the one for Nachshon ben Aminadav is not to atone for anything, and the one for the Yemei Miluim is also not an atonement. Those were just korbanos that are being brought for the day. Rosh Chodesh, there's an atonement. As we said, that if somebody who's tamei comes in, the situation of somebody who's tamei, who doesn't know, who comes into the Beis Hamikdash, so the korban of Rosh Chodesh takes care of that person, so there is an Aveira that it's being taken care of, which is interesting because they hadn't had a Kodesh area yet, so there isn't really an Aveira for this Rosh Chodesh. But, nevertheless, that's the korban that's being discussed, that's the one that was burnt. So Moshe figured out which one was being burnt, and that's the conversation. We will discuss this a little bit further tomorrow night. We will continue.
Shapir, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, Shapir Kamrulay, right?
Perfect. Yeah.
There are a couple more little points back and forth in this.